Welcome to the KIX EMAP podcast, a podcast where we interview important leaders in education from Europe, Middle East and North Africa, and the Asia and Pacific regions. I'm your host, Ryan Allen, assistant professor at Soka University of America here in Orange County, California. My own background is in international and comparative education. I just wanted to drop a little update from the podcast. This is our second episode after the recent extension of the KIX program and our KIX EMAP hub until 2027. You probably noticed a number of changes occurring in the hub recently, including the rebrand from EAP to EMAP. This means we welcome 14 new countries into the hub, and we're certainly excited about these new interview opportunities. Additionally, we will be introducing a couple of new innovations to the KIX EMAP podcast, with special episodes where we will have more than one guest for conversations around specific themes that are of interest to the audience. So be on the lookout for those. Thank you. Let's start the show. Welcome. Today we have Professor Manjula Vithanapathirana. We go over her interesting career path, moving from hard sciences to education, her work at the university, and more. Let's get to it. All right. Well, thank you for joining me today, Manjula. It's nice that we could actually connect here. And if we can just get started, and I see that you actually have a degree in zoology from the University of Colombo. Later, you made the switch into education. I'm always kind of curious about that switch with some of my guests. So maybe can you talk a little bit about that transition? Is there something about the hard science background that kind of gives you a better perspective or different perspective in the field of education?
Thank you, Ryan, for this question. It is the most appropriate to initiate our conversation, I think. You are correct. My first degree is a BSc, a specialization in zoology from University of Colombo, Sri Lanka. As many of my batchmates did, I did not apply for overseas postgraduate education. I wanted to be at home, raise a family, and of course, do my further studies. For that, I received an opportunity to do research work in parasitology, once again at the University of Colombo. However, while doing experimental work in laboratories, I realized that I was not living up to my satisfaction and that I wanted to change, to engage in research with people instead of doing microscopic investigations. I think a brief exposure that I had in participating in a big social science research before I entered university would have triggered me to find opportunities in the social world. So at that time, the National Institute of Education Sri Lanka, the NIE, was being established. I applied and got selected as a research officer in the Department of Educational Research. There, my hard science experimental research skills helped me to face the selection interview at the NIE. The director of research who interviewed me was late Dr. G.B. Gunawardena, one of the eminent educationists, who later became the Director General of NIE and subsequently the Vice Chair of National Education Commission. Although it was quite a challenge at the beginning to understand the jargon, concepts, discourses in education, I felt that it was the place for me. Since my colleagues at the Department of Educational Research were contemporaries of my parents in their University of Education, they were very senior eminent educationists in Sri Lanka. I had to work very hard to understand the ongoing work. And I did try very hard by extensively accessing the library of the NIE. I think the focused thinking, analytical skills, the problem-solving strategies acquired from the hard sciences gave me an added advantage to approach the new concepts in the discipline of education. So at that time, to highlight that, several high-quality studies were being carried out in the department, and they were in collaboration with Harvard University Institute of International Development. And I got the opportunity to work closely with academics from Harvard Michigan State, and from several other universities. So such associations with senior educators, researchers, teacher educators, both foreign and Sri Lankan, in the early years of my career in education, helped to lay down a solid foundation in my professional life. I learned various designs of educational research with hands-on experience and learned different aspects of education at the NIE, working in almost all departments, participating in various projects in curriculum development, teacher education, science education, primary education, early childhood education, etc. However, NIE lost its vigor after some time, but I was at NIE for 10 years before joining the university service. So it is the story of my transition to education from hard science.
So I hear that a lot, actually, where, it's like you follow one path and you realize, no, I love something else, or I'm drawn to something else. And often that is, coming to education. So we've certainly seen that with some guests on this show and sort of others. So what a wonderful story. But that's not the end of your journey. So we're curious to find out more. And you actually did a doctor of philosophy degree from the Institute of Education at UCL. So, you had to go to the UK, and you eventually, though, return home, even doing, another MA in Buddhist studies back at home. And maybe can you kind of talk about that decision? You mentioned that you didn't want to leave for your bachelor's.
Yeah.
What kind of goes through that?
Yeah.
Can you give us a little insight?
Um, yes, about my PhD at the Institute of Education, UCL. It was a rare scholarship I received from Professor Angela Little, one of the well-known figures in education. She selected me as a PhD scholar through a competitive procedure for her multi-country research project on multigrade education. I was also strongly recommended by the chair professor of educational psychology in my faculty at that time, late Professor Swarna Vijayatunga. My PhD was on multigrade teaching in Sri Lanka, done as an action research with teachers in rural schools. So action research was a challenging approach to complete a PhD at the time, and mine was the first action research.
Wow.
Done by a Sri Lankan scholar at IB and also in Sri Lanka. So this full scholarship in the project through defeat was a very rewarding one. So you asked me why I did not stay back. Staying back in the United Kingdom never occurred to me as an option. I aspired to resume my career at the Faculty of Education. At that time, I was a permanent employee in the Faculty of Education. And I looked forward to coming as a senior academic in my university, develop teachers, supporting colleagues, doing research with colleagues in Sri Lanka. So my study leave and various regulations regarding the scholarship were there in terms of returning to Sri Lanka, but I was not troubled over any of these things, as I always wanted to come back home after completing my PhD and serve my country, as I'm a beneficiary of the free education policy in Sri Lanka, and I will never forget that. And so that was the reason for coming back. And the next thing you asked me was about my master's degree in Buddhist studies. Yet it's another story. I learned Buddhist teachings by reading books from my father's collection and the articles and books written by my father as well. So he is an eminent Buddhist scholar in Sri Lanka. His name is Sanath Nanayakara. He was the deputy editor of Buddhist Encyclopedia. I frequently read articles focusing on Buddha's analysis of mind. I was determined from my childhood or even maybe younger days to learn Buddhist studies formally and systematically. And that is the reason for doing my postgraduate diploma and master's in Buddhist studies soon after my PhD. I wanted to integrate the Buddhist teachings on cognition with the Western psychological perspectives that we teach in the faculty. I've produced a few masters and PhDs with students who were interested in such integration to develop interventions to improve the psychosocial development of adolescents. A lot of work is going on anyway along these lines across the world, and I'm also expanding my work slowly. So, Ryan, as an outcome, with all this, I'm being recognized as an interdisciplinary scientist.
Definitely.
With my background, yes, in hard science, education, Buddhist studies, made me develop an interdisciplinary perspective while being an education scientist, which I consider as an important thing. I can highlight it with an example also.
Absolutely, yeah. Please.
I was elected as the general president of the Sri Lanka Association for the Advancement of Science in 2016. So SLAS is the premier multidisciplinary professional association in Sri Lanka, established even before independence in 1944. SLAS membership has all disciplines represented: biological sciences, physical, engineering, medical sciences, all that. So social sciences is one section. The general president is the overall president of the association, elected for a year. So I was the 74th general president of the association and the second education scientist to be elected to that position. So it was a kind of a very unique thing, because normally the scientists from natural sciences, hard sciences are elected to these positions, and social sciences are represented, but the recognition that we receive for scientists in these disciplines are a little different in Sri Lanka, especially those days. And because I see situations through a broader interdisciplinary lens, I think my perspective to various issues are a little different than when considering when discipline-specific kind of a perspective. So I collaborate with my colleagues from natural sciences in designing courses like chemistry education, maths education, biology education, designing courses for ICT programs to build psychosocial development and effective learning skills, design training managers of the corporate sector as counselors in organizations. So I do a range of things across various disciplines, and I'm very happy about it. Yes, Ryan.
Yeah, what a wonderful and an inspiring story, I think, of
Thank
doing
you.
the degree abroad
Yeah.
and coming back and further your education. I think a lot of people can listen to the story and have their own
Yeah.
because everyone kind of has their own journey. So listening to that, I think
I'm glad. I'm glad.
definitely. And I'm sitting at a university that has a Buddhist kind of connections as well, Soka University
Wow.
of America. So it is interesting to
Right.
to kind of
Yes.
see somebody that's bringing in this really interdisciplinary
Yes.
focus, because I know how hard it is to bring in
Yes.
interdisciplinary. Even just within the social science, it's hard to get
Mm,
like political sciences to talk to
mm.
education, like so I appreciate the effort.
Correct. Correct. Yes.
Um,
Mm,
you already kind of mentioned some of your students, which is fantastic, and maybe we can dive more into that. So,
mm,
you're the chair professor of educational psychology at the Faculty of Education, University of Colombo, and actually you're the
mm.
former dean of the Faculty of
Yeah.
Education. So, is this more the program's mostly training teachers, or
Mm-hmm.
where are your students kind of ending up? And maybe if you if you are training teachers, how has that changed, or how has this program kind of changed over the last 25 years of your career?
Yes, Dan. I am the chair of educational psychology, and I held the deanship of the faculty from 2016 to 2019. It was a very challenging position, and I enjoyed doing it. And the faculty, and I was very fortunate as well, as the Faculty of Education, University of Colombo, was established in 1973 and is the oldest faculty of education in Sri Lanka. And of the 17 universities in Sri Lanka, we have only 2 faculties of education and 3 departments of education. The other faculty is the comparatively recently established faculty at the Open University of Sri Lanka, and they conduct programs through open and distance modalities. And the Bachelor of Education program of the Colombo faculty is the most reputed, exemplary program to produce professionally qualified graduate teachers. And in addition, the postgraduate diploma in education is also an important teacher professional development program that is mandatory to become a trained graduate. So you asked me about my students, and many of our BEd graduates and trained PGD graduates pursue postgraduate higher studies. After gaining some years of experience, they take up positions as in-service advisors, teacher educators at national colleges of education. These are the pre-service teacher training institutions under NIE, and join NIE as academics and get into principal service and education administration service, and also become directors of education and even university academics. And many of my colleagues in the faculty at the moment are BEd graduates. So they go through quite a rewarding career, and they do have career prospects. And regarding this, the question about the programs, teacher education, yes, we are engaging in teacher education programs. And across my years in the faculty or the university, I would say that, the programs became more systematic, formalized, regulated over the years. And with these changes, there were a lot of updates and upgradings also, like SDGs, 21st century learning skills. They were accommodated to these programs. And the programs are accredited by the UJC. Although they are good moves, I observe that the functioning of the programs have become very challenging to everyone and to the institution, because the workloads are very heavy for both trainers and trainees to fulfill requirements of the programs according to the rules and regulations, credit systems within a given schedule, which is normally very tight and rigid academic calendars. I'm not sure, with all these efforts, whether we were able to prepare to make a quality professional educator that we aspire to have in our schools. Added to this, there is a continuous dissatisfaction about teaching learning in school system. I see it as a mismatch between the learner-centered approach that we highlight in the training programs and the demands of the examination-oriented system of education in Sri Lanka, where only limited types of skills are assessed. So, it's an ongoing problem for decades and decades, and education reformers have been attempting to address these issues. However, the issues prevail, right? Because it's a big problem in the country. The examinations, the tuition culture, and students being, rote learners. And we are training the teachers for learner-centered education. Where would all these things lead to? It's a big question.
Right. Yeah, that's a quandary that you have there, and sort of you maybe can recognize what your values might be and training for that type of environment, but then the teachers go into quote the real world and suddenly they're facing a government or a system, I guess, that is telling them something else needs to be done. Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds difficult. Maybe we can talk about some of those
Mhm.
issues and projects that you've been working on in terms of broader policy. And so, you've had considerable projects in your career. One of them is the EU co-funded Contessa project. So maybe you can kind of talk about that recent work and like what are the barriers in terms of implementation and improving
Yeah.
teacher quality? I mean, have you talked with the government and they are receptive, or what's happening there?
One of the best things to talk about about the recent work that I've done is about the EU co-funded Erasmus Plus project, Contessa, the Contemporary Teaching Skills for South Asia. So it was a capacity building project initiated by University of Graz and Technical University Dresden, Germany. And I was the national coordinator for Sri Lanka. So my journey started with Contessa in 2017 when colleagues from University of Graz requested the consent from the project to form a project consortium and then apply for a competitive grant from EU. And we were lucky. The grant was awarded in 2018. The outcomes of this project were modules on teacher development launched as OERs and training of teacher programs and installation of smart classrooms for teacher education purposes in the two faculties, our faculty and the Open University. The process was hard, actually, the 3-year-long project, and we went through the hard times of COVID-19 as well. But the modules shaped up very well, and they were very innovative and learner-centeredly sort of developed with a very creative, interactive format. And the content was also co-created and not imposed as top-down intervention from Europe. And these modules are very, very good as they can be implemented face-to-face, online, or as in blended modalities. So this participation of in these activities was a great capacity building experience for the teacher educators in Sri Lanka. And so the acceptability of these outcomes, it's like this. These modules are incorporated into a teacher education program. We did that and developed a program submitted for review and accreditation by the UGC. And it's being considered. And once the approval is granted, we can scale up the intervention. So there is no problem in that. But I wish to indicate that in general, the government doesn't place the due importance on the university-based teacher education. It's a major barrier to the development of high-quality teachers who are capable of teaching all subjects at the secondary level. Shortages of academic staff in the education faculties and education departments of the universities is a major issue. We need professionally qualified, experienced teacher educators from different academic backgrounds to deliver teacher education programs effectively. Say like if you want to deliver science education, you need teacher educators who have done science as well as professional education on doing their masters in education and other experiences as educators. So such people will have to be accommodated in faculties. And the teacher educators cannot be developed overnight. I mean, it's a long process. You take my life, it was a long process. You can't develop them just, getting their, just qualification won't make a teacher educators. So for that, the faculties and departments should be developed through a gradual process of research and mentoring. At the moment, all members of education faculties and departments are loaded with timetables for teaching, and there's no opportunity to engage in professional development activities like research, participate in, the multi-site, multinational projects. And if these situations go on further, the quality of education will be affected very badly, because the continuous systematic effort to expand, enrich the existing university-based teacher education should be, become a priority for the policymakers in Sri Lanka, rather than attempting to open completely new institutions. So I hope this situation will be resolved in an acceptable manner in the near future. If not, we are heading a big problem, right?
That's after your hopeful beginning, we sort of get to the reality. But so hopefully, your work and with your colleagues, you can continue to kind of push for those changes and reforms that you're advocating and teaching with your students. With that being said, we're kind of coming to the end of the interview, and maybe we can give a message to our audience. One of the things that you've done is you kind of work not just in the country, but beyond and into the region. So northern areas of Pakistan, but also UNICEF in Africa.
Yes.
Can you talk maybe how do you sort of successfully work with these different stakeholders in geographic locations on these kind of projects? Like, do you have advice on sort of helping to coordinate and communicate in these kinds of projects?
Another good question, Ryan. So, when I reflect on the work that I was requested to do in the northern areas of Pakistan, beyond Gilgit, visiting the most remote schools and communities in high terrain, and in Eritrea also, a country which many Sri Lankans may not even have heard of. And, I can say that I did not feel the so-called vast differences to make a disturbance in my mindset when the work was assigned to me. And to reflect and tell you why and how it may have happened, because I had realized that differences are everywhere, even in my own small country. And differences are existing within ourselves as well. The psychological teachings do indicate that. So IOE was a place where I met many coming from all over the world. And sitting in the IOE lobby was a, experience itself. And I think the exposure to IOE community made a big change to help broaden my perspectives about people, learn about the different contexts they represent. And by being a member of the multi-grade international project, I had got opportunities to visit school contexts, interact with stakeholders in several amazing contexts in Peruvian Amazon and Andean schools, Vietnamese schools in the hills, multi-grade schools in Wales, Himalayan school contexts in Nepal. So these were invaluable experiences. So I think I'm a reasonably a good lifelong learner and not a preacher only, as I have learned a lot from experiences both formal and informal. As a result, the challenge of doing work in these foreign contexts was under control. One other thing is that my approach to work is to start from the ground level, from the bottom, the inductive approach. Then work becomes feasible and effective. Also, then it becomes a participatory process. And top-down interventions are not sustained in any context. Gradually, what I do is to incorporate my knowledge as necessary to shape the outcome. But the ownership of the work has to be with the partners in the context. So this is the working formula. So I do remember a similar question was asked by the panel at the IOE when I presented my PhD research proposal. The question was whether it would be feasible for me, somebody from Colombo, to adjust and do research with an interventionist perspective in rural Sri Lanka with, innocent teachers. I remember I gave a confident answer even at that time. So with my PhD research as an action researcher in the remote schools of Sri Lanka with untrained teachers, I learned the importance of empathizing with the contextual realities and adopting participatory approaches with stakeholders. So the intervention that I did for my PhD was a lesson planning intervention where multi-grade teachers benefited. They were not doing any kind of systematic teaching when I visited their schools to intervene and see what I can do for the multi-grade education in Sri Lanka. So in order to give you some advice as requested by you for improving the coordination of such projects, the key aspects would be to seek for experts who are ready to work in partnership with the stakeholders at the ground level and develop innovations to address issues of specific context rather than imposing knowledge developed elsewhere as directives for implementation. So just directions won't work in any context. If not, even if the expert is highly knowledgeable, the knowledge would be wasted because the stakeholders in the context may not be ready to follow the expert guidelines when dictated. So the approach of the strategic plan for work needs to be reviewed and considered carefully. And to highlight with some new practices, the need for co-creation of knowledge and encouraging communities of practice are necessary for this kind of work. So when planning this kind of interventions, one has to understand how to select a proper expert and to get a proper plan and discuss and then, commission the research or the developmental work.
Yeah, well, I think you circled us back. We got hopeful again. I think so. I appreciate that to end on action research, empathy, on the ground experts. This is all a wonderful thing to end on. So, Manjula, thank you for joining me on the podcast. This has been a really enjoyable talk, and we learned a lot. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ryan, for inviting me.
And this concludes our KIX EMAP podcast. Of course, the opinions expressed on the podcast are solely those of the host and the guest. The KIX EMAP podcast is made possible by KIX, which stands for Knowledge and Innovation Exchange. KIX is an initiative of the Global Partnership for Education. Globally, KIX is administered by the International Development Research Center in Canada. NORAG in Geneva hosts one of the 4 regional KIX hubs. find us on the NORAG or GPE websites, where you can subscribe to the podcast and newsletter, or learn about our other activities, including KIX research project updates. Additionally, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube at KIX EMAP. You can also directly subscribe to the podcast on Spotify or SoundCloud, and you'll receive notifications of each new podcast episode. Thanks for listening.